There are things in life that people follow without question, habits they grow up with, choices they make every day without ever stopping to ask why. And for many, food is one of those things, something normal, something routine, something that feels too simple to carry deeper meaning. Yet sometimes the simplest things hold the deepest lessons, and sometimes what you are told not to consume is not only about what enters your body, but about what shapes your heart and your obedience. There is something that millions of people eat every day without a second thought, something common, something widely accepted, something that is part of normal life in many parts of the world. Yet for Muslims, it is completely forbidden, not discouraged, not limited, but clearly and firmly prohibited. And for someone looking from the outside, this raises a question that seems simple but carries more depth than it first appears. Why would something so common be completely forbidden? Why would something that others consider normal be placed behind a clear boundary? And why does that boundary remain strong regardless of time, culture, or place? Because this is not a rule that changes, it is not something that depends on opinion, it is something fixed, something that holds its place regardless of how the world around it shifts. At first, many people search for physical reasons, explanations that can be seen, measured, and understood in a direct way, and there are reasons that are often mentioned, concerns related to health, to cleanliness, to what this animal consumes and how it lives. And while these points may carry some truth, they are not the full picture, because if this rule was only about health, it would change with time, it would adjust with new knowledge, but it does not. And this is where the understanding begins to move deeper, because in Islam, not everything is based only on what you can measure, not everything is limited to what can be proven in a laboratory, because life itself is not limited to what is visible, and guidance is not always about what you fully understand in the moment. There are commands that protect you in ways you may not immediately see, there are boundaries that exist not only for the body, but for the soul, for the discipline of a person, for the connection between a human being and their creator, and this is where the meaning begins to expand beyond the surface. Because when something is clearly forbidden, it creates a line that a person chooses not to cross, and that choice, repeated over time, builds something within them, it builds restraint, it builds awareness, it builds a sense of control over desires that would otherwise go unchecked. And this is not only about one type of food, it is about a principle that teaches a person that not everything that is available should be taken, not everything that is normal should be accepted, and not everything that is desired should be followed. A person begins to understand that discipline is not built in large moments, it is built in small choices, in daily decisions, in the quiet moments where no one is watching, and choosing to avoid something that is easily accessible becomes a form of strength, a form of control, a form of obedience that shapes the person over time. And this is where the deeper question appears, because the real meaning is not only about what is being avoided, but about why it is being avoided, because if the reason is only external, it can be debated, it can be questioned, it can be changed, but when the reason is connected to something higher, something beyond human opinion, it carries a different kind of weight. There is also a reality that many do not consider, that human knowledge is limited, that what is understood today may not have been understood before, and what is unknown now may become clear later, and this is why not everything is dependent on full understanding before it is followed. Because if a person only follows what they fully understand, their obedience is limited by their knowledge, and knowledge itself is always incomplete, always growing, always changing, and this creates a fragile foundation, a foundation that shifts whenever understanding changes. But when a person follows something because it is commanded by Allah, because it comes from a source that is beyond human limitation, then that obedience is not tied to changing knowledge, it is tied to trust, to belief, to a recognition that guidance comes from a place that sees what humans cannot. And this is where the meaning becomes clearer, because the prohibition is not only about the substance itself, it is about what that prohibition creates within a person, the ability to say no, the ability to control desire, the ability to follow guidance even when it is not fully understood. Because true discipline is not tested when something is easy to avoid, it is tested when something is common, when something is normalized, when something is easily accessible, and choosing to avoid it despite all of that builds something real, something lasting. There is also a connection between what a person consumes and how they live, not only physically but spiritually, because what enters the body does not remain isolated, it becomes part of a person's system, part of their energy, part of what influences them in ways that are not always visible. And while not everything can be measured, not everything can be proven in a simple way, the effect of discipline, the effect of obedience, the effect of following guidance over desire becomes clear over time, because it shapes how a person thinks, how they act, and how they respond to the world around them. This is why the rule remains strong, unchanged, consistent, because it is not built on temporary reasoning, it is built on a principle that does not shift with trends, that does not adapt to convenience, that remains firm regardless of how the world changes. And this is where the understanding begins to settle, not as a simple answer but as a deeper realization that what is forbidden is not always about restriction. Sometimes it is about protection. Sometimes it is about building something within you that cannot be built in any other way. Because in the end, it was never only about the food itself, it was about what that choice represents, what it builds, and what it connects you to, and that is where the real meaning begins. As this understanding begins to settle, the question starts to shift, because it is no longer only about what is forbidden, it becomes about what that prohibition is meant to create within a person, because every command in Islam carries a purpose, even if that purpose is not always immediately clear. A person starts to realize that life is full of choices, small and large, visible and hidden, and each choice moves them in a direction, either toward discipline or toward desire, either toward control or toward habit, and what seems like a simple decision in the moment is actually part of something much bigger. Because when a person is told that something is forbidden, especially something that is common and easily available, it becomes a test, not just of action but of intention, a test of whether they follow what they want or what they are commanded to follow. And this is where the difference becomes clear, because anyone can follow what is easy, anyone can follow what is normal, but choosing to follow something that goes against the norm, something that requires awareness and restraint, that is where true obedience begins to show. It is not about being different for the sake of being different, it is about aligning with something that is higher than personal preference, something that is not based on what feels good in the moment, but on what is right beyond the moment. And this is where trust becomes central, because a person may not always understand every detail, may not always see every reason, but they choose to follow because they trust the source of that command, they trust that what has been given is not random, not without wisdom, not without purpose. This trust is not blind, it is built over time, through reflection, through understanding other aspects of life, through seeing how guidance shapes a person in ways that go beyond what they initially expected, and this is what strengthens faith, not just knowing but experiencing the impact of following what is right. There is also something deeper in this, something that goes beyond the individual action, because when a person consistently follows what is commanded, even in small things, it builds a pattern, a habit of obedience, a mindset that carries into other areas of life. And this is what makes small commands powerful, because they are not isolated, they connect to everything else, they shape how a person responds when faced with larger challenges, larger temptations, and more difficult decisions. If a person cannot control themselves in what seems small, it becomes harder to control themselves in what is greater. And this is why discipline is built step by step, through repeated actions that strengthen a person's ability to choose correctly. At the same time, there is a reminder within this, a reminder that not everything that is allowed is beneficial, and not everything that is forbidden is harmful in an obvious way, because human perception is limited, and what is seen is only a small part of a much larger reality. This is why guidance does not depend on human approval, it does not wait for full understanding, it does not adjust to what people prefer, it remains as it is, because it comes from a source that is not limited by time, by culture, or by changing knowledge. And when a person understands this, their relationship with commands begins to change, because they no longer see them as restrictions, but as guidance, not as limitations but as direction, something that protects them even when they do not fully see how. There is also a sense of identity that forms through this, because following what is commanded, even when it is different from what others do, creates a clear sense of who a person is and what they stand for, and this clarity brings strength. It removes confusion, it removes hesitation, because decisions are no longer based only on personal feeling, but on a consistent framework that guides a person in every situation, and this creates stability in a world that is constantly changing. And as this continues, a person begins to see that obedience is not a burden, it is a form of freedom, because it frees them from being controlled by every desire, every impulse, every temporary feeling that can easily lead them in different directions. Instead of being pulled by whatever appears in front of them, they move with intention, with awareness, with a sense of purpose that is not shaken by every change around them. This is where the deeper meaning of the prohibition becomes visible, because it is no longer about the specific thing itself, it is about what it teaches, what it builds, and what it protects. And this understanding does not come all at once. It develops over time, through practice, through consistency, through seeing the effect of living with discipline rather than without it. A person begins to feel the difference not only in their actions but in their mindset, in their ability to pause, to think, to choose rather than react. And this is what creates a stronger, more grounded way of living. Because in the end, the question is not only about what is allowed or forbidden, it is about what kind of person you are becoming through those choices, what you are building within yourself, and how those small decisions are shaping your direction. And this is where the meaning becomes clearer, because what may seem like a simple rule is actually part of a much larger system. A system that guides a person towards something more stable, more controlled, and more meaningful than simply following whatever feels easy in the moment. As this understanding continues to deepen, the focus begins to shift even further because it is no longer only about discipline or obedience, it becomes about connection, about what these choices mean in relation to a person's relationship with Allah, and how even the smallest actions reflect something much greater than they appear. A person starts to realize that every command carries a message, not only about what to do or what to avoid, but about who they are in relation to their Creator, because following a command is not just an action, it is a response that reflects trust, belief, and a willingness to align with something higher than personal desire. And this is where the meaning of obedience becomes more personal because it is no longer seen as a general rule, it becomes something direct, something that speaks to the individual, something that asks, will you follow even when you do not fully understand? Will you trust even when you cannot see the full picture? This is not always easy because human nature seeks explanation, seeks clarity, seeks reasons that can be understood and measured, but there are moments where full understanding is not available, and in those moments, a person's response reveals something deeper about their faith. Some will wait until everything makes sense before they act, but in doing so, they limit their obedience to their understanding, and as a result, their actions depend on something that is always incomplete, always changing. Others choose differently, they act based on trust, based on belief, based on the understanding that guidance comes from a source that sees beyond human limitation, and this creates a different kind of relationship, a relationship built not only on knowledge but on certainty. And this certainty does not remove the value of understanding, it strengthens it, because when a person trusts first, they become more open to learning, more open to reflecting, more open to seeing the wisdom that unfolds over time. There are things that may not make full sense in the moment, but later become clear, not necessarily through scientific explanation alone, but through experience, through the way those choices shape a person's life, their habits, their mindset, and their connection. And this is where the meaning expands beyond the physical, because what a person avoids is not only affecting their body, it is influencing their heart, their awareness, their ability to remain connected to what truly matters. A heart that is trained to follow guidance becomes more sensitive, more aware, more responsive, while a heart that constantly follows desire becomes less aware, less responsive, more distant, and this difference is not always visible, but it is deeply felt. This is why small acts of obedience carry so much value, because they are not isolated, they build a pattern, they strengthen a connection, they reinforce a direction that continues over time. And this is also why ignoring small boundaries can have a larger effect than expected, because it is not only about the action itself, it is about what it represents, a shift away from awareness, a step toward following what is easy rather than what is right. A person begins to see that every command is part of a system that is designed not to restrict life, but to guide it, to protect it, and to bring it into alignment with something that remains stable even when everything else changes. There is also a realization that what is forbidden is not always obvious in its harm, just as what is allowed is not always obvious in its benefit, because human perception is limited, and what is visible is only a small part of what is real. This is why trust becomes essential, because without trust, a person is constantly negotiating with guidance, constantly questioning whether to follow or not based on what they currently understand, and this creates inconsistency, uncertainty, and instability. But with trust, there is clarity, a clear direction that does not shift with every new idea, every new trend, every new opinion, because it is rooted in something that does not change with time. And this clarity allows a person to move through life with confidence, not because they know everything, but because they know the source they are following, and that knowledge is enough to guide them even when details are not fully clear. As this awareness grows, the meaning of what is avoided becomes clearer because it is no longer about the object itself, it is about what choosing to avoid it represents, a commitment, a discipline, a connection that is maintained through consistent action. And this is where the deeper impact begins to show, because a person who builds this pattern of obedience carries it into every area of life, into how they speak, how they act, how they respond to challenges, and how they make decisions. What begins as a simple act of avoiding something becomes part of a larger identity, a way of living that reflects awareness, control, and purpose, and this is what gives it true value. Because in the end, it was never only about the thing itself, it was about what that choice reveals, what it builds, and how it shapes the relationship between a person and their creator in a way that continues far beyond the moment itself. As this understanding settles deeper, a new layer begins to reveal itself, one that is not only about obedience or discipline, but about the unseen effects of what a person allows into their life, because not everything that influences you is visible, and not everything that shapes you can be measured in a direct way. A person begins to realize that what they consume is not limited to the physical, it carries influence beyond the surface, affecting not only the body but the state of the heart, the clarity of the mind, and the sensitivity of the soul. And this is where the meaning of what is permitted and what is forbidden takes on a deeper significance. There is a connection between input and outcome, between what enters and what develops, and even if this connection is not always obvious, it exists in a way that becomes clearer over time, especially for those who pay attention to how their actions affect their inner state. Because the heart is not separate from what a person does, it is shaped by it, influenced by it, strengthened or weakened through repeated choices, and what may seem like a small action can have a larger effect when it is repeated consistently. This is why Islam does not only focus on major actions, but also on smaller ones, because it recognizes that what appears small can grow, can influence, can become something much larger when left without attention. And when something is clearly forbidden, it is not placed there without reason, even if that reason is not fully understood, because the purpose is not only to prevent harm that is immediately visible, but also to protect from harm that develops gradually, harm that may not be noticed until it has already taken effect. A person may not feel any difference in a single moment, may not see any clear impact from one action, but over time, repeated choices create patterns, and those patterns shape the way a person feels, thinks, and responds. And this is where the idea of protection becomes clearer, because what is forbidden is not always a punishment, it is often a boundary that protects a person from something they may not fully see, something that does not show its effect immediately but builds over time. There is also a deeper understanding that begins to form, that not everything beneficial is immediately enjoyable, and not everything harmful is immediately uncomfortable, because what feels good in the moment is not always what is good in the long term. And this is where guidance becomes essential, because it provides direction beyond personal feeling, beyond temporary comfort, beyond what seems normal in a given environment, and it anchors a person in something more stable than changing perception. A person begins to see that following guidance is not about restriction, it is about alignment, about bringing their actions in line with something that is designed to protect and guide them, even when they do not fully understand how. There is also a realization that true strength is not in doing whatever is available, but in being able to choose what is right over what is easy, what is guided over what is desired, and this strength is built through repeated choices, not through single moments. And as this strength grows, a person begins to experience a different kind of clarity, a clarity that comes from consistency, from knowing what they follow and why, from having a direction that is not constantly shifting with every new influence. This clarity affects how they move through life, how they respond to challenges, how they make decisions, and how they maintain balance even when faced with temptation or pressure from the environment around them. Because when a person is grounded in guidance, they are not easily moved by what is common, by what is popular, or by what others accept without question. They have a standard that does not depend on what changes around them. And this is where the deeper wisdom of prohibition becomes visible, because it is not only about avoiding harm, it is about building stability, about creating a life that is not controlled by impulse, but guided by purpose. A person begins to understand that every boundary has a purpose, every limit carries meaning, and every command is part of a system that is designed to bring balance, not only in actions but in the inner state of a person. And this balance is not something that appears suddenly, it develops over time, through consistency, through awareness, through repeated alignment with what is right rather than what is easy. As this continues, the meaning of what is avoided becomes clearer, because it is no longer seen as something taken away, but as something that protects, something that preserves, something that keeps a person aligned with what truly benefits them. And this is where everything begins to connect, because what starts as a simple rule becomes part of a larger understanding, a way of living that reflects awareness, discipline, and trust in a guidance that sees beyond what is immediately visible. Because in the end, it was never only about what you consume, it was about what that choice does to you, what it builds within you, and how it shapes the direction of your life in ways that go far beyond the moment itself. As everything begins to come together, as the layers of understanding connect and the meaning becomes clearer, the final realization takes form, not as a complex explanation, but as a simple truth that carries deep weight, because in the end, it was never only about what is forbidden, it was about what that prohibition represents. A person starts to see that life itself is a series of tests, not always in dramatic moments, but in small, repeated choices, in daily decisions that seem ordinary but carry meaning beyond what is visible, and what a person chooses in those moments shapes more than they realize. Because every command is an opportunity to follow or to ignore, to align or to drift, to strengthen connection or to weaken it, and these opportunities are constant, present in every part of life, not just in the moments that feel significant. This is where the idea of obedience reaches its true meaning, because it is no longer about following a rule, it becomes about responding to a call, a call that asks a person to choose what is right even when it is not convenient, even when it is not fully understood, even when it goes against what others may accept as normal. And this response reveals something deeper, something that goes beyond action. It reflects what a person truly prioritizes, what they are willing to follow, and what they are willing to leave behind for the sake of something greater. There is also a realization that forms with this understanding, that guidance is not given to limit a person's life, but to protect it, to shape it, to direct it towards something that remains meaningful beyond the temporary nature of this world. What may seem like a restriction begins to feel like clarity because it removes confusion, it provides direction, it gives a person a stable path in a world where everything else is constantly changing. And this clarity creates a different kind of freedom, not the freedom to do anything without limit, but the freedom to move with purpose, to choose with awareness, to live without being controlled by every desire or impulse. A person begins to understand that true control is not in having access to everything, but in being able to choose correctly even when everything is available, and this is what gives value to discipline because it is not forced, it is chosen. There is also a deeper connection that becomes visible, because every act of obedience, even in something small, strengthens a person's relationship with Allah, it builds trust, it builds sincerity, it builds a sense of closeness that grows over time. And this connection is not built in one moment, it is built through consistency, through repeated choices that align with guidance, through a pattern of actions that reflect belief rather than convenience. As this pattern forms, a person begins to see their life differently, not as a series of disconnected events, but as a path that is being shaped with every decision, every action, every response to what is commanded and what is forbidden. This is where the deeper meaning of everything becomes clear, because what a person avoids is not only shaping their behavior, it is shaping their identity, it is defining who they are and what they stand for. And this identity is not based on what is easy, it is based on what is chosen consistently, on what is followed even when it requires effort, and this is what gives it strength. Because when a person builds their life on guidance rather than desire, they create stability within themselves, something that does not change with circumstances, something that remains even when everything else shifts. And this is where the final message becomes clear, not as something distant, but as something immediate, something that applies in every moment of life. Because in the end, it was never just about the meat itself, it was about obedience, about trust, about the willingness to follow guidance even when full understanding is not present. It was about building discipline in the small things so that a person is prepared for the greater tests, about shaping a heart that responds to what is right rather than what is easy. And this is what gives that simple prohibition its true meaning, because it reflects something much deeper than the action itself. It reflects a connection, a commitment, and a direction that continues far beyond the moment. So the question is no longer why something is forbidden, the question is what that choice reveals about you, what it builds within you, and how it shapes the path you are walking every single day.